Hey, today I'm going to talk about how to eat for optimal results in the gym. And there are really only three diets out there. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the pros and cons of each strategy. But first, some context. The reason that we're talking about this is that the standard, like North American diet, is really just like eat whatever the hell you want, whenever you want to, right? It's just wide open. If you feel hungry, eat something. If you feel tired, eat some carbs, drink some coffee. If you're out with friends, eat as much as they're eating and more. And this standard American diet has like no restrictions on it at all. And that's what's gotten us into this state of now premature aging and death. And so if we're trying to optimize health span, what we really want to do is like focus on some kind of control in our diet. So the first thing for context is there are only three types of diet. I'm sure that you've seen hundreds of diet books. And if you go down to the mall and you look at the bookstore or you type diet book into Amazon, you're going to see thousands of different diet books. But there are really only three types of diets. The first is a volume restricted, where you're like counting calories. The second is a macro restricted, where you're not eating one certain type of food, like you're not eating fat or you're not eating carbs or you're not eating protein. And the third is time restricted. These are the three restrictions that you can put on your diet. And we're going to talk about examples and pros and cons of each one. So you can restrict the volume that you eat, you can restrict the type of food that you eat, or you can restrict when you eat. All right. And you're going to hear a lot about all of these, I'm sure, in the mainstream media. So a volume restricted diet is just basically like eating less. And Bernstein is a famous example of this because there were some Bernstein studies showing like reduced rate of cancer in people who consumed very few calories, right? 800, 900 calories a day. And this actually became a big weight loss fad. And sometimes it crops up, but in different forms. So what'll happen is somebody will prescribe a diet that's very low calorie, and they'll give you like a B12 supplement or some caffeine pills so that you don't feel hungry, and you slowly starve the body down. Now, this isn't all con, but it's mostly con because you lose lean muscle tissue when you do that. Your body will make sugar to eat if you're not feeding it sugar to eat, and so it breaks down lean muscle tissue. And over time, that just absolutely destroys your metabolism because it's that lean muscle tissue that really consumes the food that you eat. So you're making the engine of the car smaller over time. People do see dramatic results if they have the willpower to stick on a very low calorie diet, but like nobody stays on this forever because culturally, you're surrounded by people eating great tasting food, and your body is always going to be in this state of like hunger where you're always tempted, and at some point you have a stressful day, your willpower is just kind of ground down, you're not going to be able to stop yourself. And so people, they do this diet, they lose some weight, including lean muscle tissue, and they get off the diet, gain the weight back, but now a smaller percentage of them is lean muscle tissue, so they've got a smaller metabolic engine, so they starve again, and you get this ratchet effect that means that the diet gets less effective every single time, and they take two steps backward in their health. There's some other examples of caloric restriction, like Weight Watchers, South Beach diet, and you'll see like some overlaps with these. Like South Beach diet was not just caloric restriction, but it was also like a Mediterranean type diet. And Weight Watchers is not just calorie control, but there's also a little bit of macro counting in it too. All right. So the next type of diet that you get is what we would call macro restricted, where we're saying, or somebody is saying, don't eat that food, but eat as much of the rest of the food that you want. So ketogenic diets are one example. Eat lots of protein and lots of fat. You don't need to eat carbs because your body will break down proteins and fats through a process called gluconeogenesis if you train it to do that, and it'll make its own carbs. And this is true, it happens. It usually takes 3 to 4 weeks of feeling like hungry, groggy to get into this ketogenic state. But there are some benefits to the ketogenic diet, and there are some rare performers, like maybe 10% of people, who can perform just as well on this, especially if they're doing zone one, zone two exercise and never rising above it. Then their energy expenditure can match like their energy intake that they get through the proteins and fats. One thing though, there is a myth that you can't get fat on a keto diet. That's absolutely untrue. If you're eating more calories than you burn, eventually you're going to gain weight on a ketogenic diet anyway. And the thing with keto is like you have to get into keto, which is tough. You have to stay in keto because if you go out and have like some birthday cake 2 days in a row and get out of ketosis, you have a tough road to get your body back into that. Our bodies have been trained to use carbohydrates. And Atkins is very similar, very low carb. It's just kind of a difference of degree between keto and Atkins. Vegetarian, you're not eating animal fats or animal proteins. Vegan, you're probably not eating very many fats at all, and you're definitely not eating any animal or like animal-born proteins. And zone. So the zone is an interesting one because you're not specifically saying zero amounts of a certain macro. You're just keeping all three of the macronutrients in a tight little ratio, usually 40, 30, 30, 40% carbs, 30% protein, 30% fat. Different people will do well on different types of diets. It depends how much stress you have in your life. It depends on what's in your gut for digestion. It depends on what you can tolerate. A lot of it depends on what your family eats. Like it's very tough to be the only vegetarian in your family, extremely tough to be the only vegan in your family. I know some of you guys can attest to this. And you'll also see overlap too. Like a lot of people who are vegetarian without meaning to are also eating like a very low volume diet, right? They're not getting very many calories because they're not sure what to eat, so they just don't. Or sometimes people who are eating vegetarian are not necessarily getting the right type of macronutrients. So they're also like very low in protein because they're not combining vegetables together properly to create like the proteins that they need. I'm sure you know a potato chip vegetarian or two who doesn't eat meat, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they eat well either. Okay. The time restricted diets are more interesting, and you're going to see a lot more of these in the media coming up. And so these are like intermittent fasting. And so intermittent fasting can take place over days or it can take place over hours. There's a couple of extremes here where some people will fast for up to a week. Like they really won't eat anything and they'll just fill themselves up on liquids. And they do okay, some of them. And another one is like you have a window of eating. So you might you might only eat during a 4 hour window of the day from 3 p.m. till 7, and that's it. The rest of the time, like you just don't eat. And in this diet, like you're really training your body to get better at gluconeogenesis. And again, like in the first 3 to 4 weeks, it's going to be very, very tough to stick to that. You're going to feel hungry, but eventually your body will adapt because that's what your body does. And another newer movement is intermittent fasting and nutrients. I think the AAN is for. So basically, what you're doing is like you're tracking your nutrients to make sure that you're maintaining muscle mass, maintaining enough carbohydrates for energy, that sort of thing. And during that feeding window of 4 or 6 hours, you're being like super, super you're paying very close attention to what you're putting in during that time. You're not just hammering food. You are eating a lot, like a big meal. You're not restricting calories. You're still getting 2,500 calories in, but you're doing all that within about a 4 hour window. So during that window, you're not really doing much else. The pros to this diet, you know, there's a lot of decent science coming out saying like if you're going to do one of these three types of diet, do a time restricted diet as far as like improving health span and healthier aging. Your body likes to struggle a little bit with, you know, adversity basically. So if you're going into very short term fasting, there's a lot of emerging research that says like this can help you lower your risk of cancer, stuff like that. The key though is like this is not the same as starving yourself or being anorexic or bulimic and just like not eating, not eating, not eating until you're absolutely sick and then, you know, just hammering as much food as you can in and then throwing it up or like starving yourself out of punishment. So with any of these diets, you can take them too far. They can become catabolic. They can also become like a chronic problem or an eating disorder. And an eating disorder is when you take it way beyond the bounds of sensible logical use. So no matter what you choose, you should do it under the care of somebody who's qualified to do it. What we found after coaching for more than 20 years is that the more important than any one of these specific diets is developing habits that keep you within like a certain zone of good eating, but don't restrict you from the things that we do culturally. So your family's eating dinner, you don't have to stand over at the side of the kitchen and sniff the food and not eat with them. Somebody wants to take you over coffee, you should go over coffee. Most of the time, if you're struggling with your weight, you should be following one of these three diets. Sometimes you might even be following two. Like I'm going to do macros and I'm going to do it within this 4 hour intermittent fasting window. That's fine. It's rare that you'll do all three because that is so restrictive that it's probably going to become a problem for you. Okay. But the habits, consistently over time is way more important than doing any diet that you read in a book or that I've presented here that you're only going to do for a month or two, because those diets rarely don't help you. The time period is too short to change your life your health span. And a lot of them do more harm than good because you can only maintain them for a short time. Here's the simplest advice that I use. So number one, like call a nutrition coach, right? Call somebody who is paid to get you the result that you're trying to get with your nutrition. Pay somebody who sees the big picture, who has context on health span and lifespan and habits and what it's going to take to eat the way that you need to eat for a very long time instead of a specific diet. When you read a book and you're like, that diet sounds great, or a friend of yours says, I lost 30 pounds on this, ask them, how long have you been doing it? And if the answer is less than 90 days, it's probably not going to help you. And here are three other pieces of advice that I've found over time. Greg Glassman is really great at like simplifying things down to their core essence. Eat meat and vegetables, nuts and seeds, some fruit, little starch and no sugar. Keep intake to levels that will support exercise but not body fat. This is common mantra in CrossFit. Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. That's a very easy to remember piece of advice from Michael Pollan. And Rob Wolf once gave me some advice that you should stick to the perimeter of a grocery store because that's where the healthier foods are, and skip the aisles because that's just where all the processed foods and processed carbs are. So I hope this helps. You can book a call or book an appointment with our nutrition coach at Catalyst anytime if you want something more specific than this.